Welcome everyone to this session. We're glad you came and we hope you'll find the content valuable. And with that, I'll turn it over to Paul to uh, get the show going. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Was everybody seeing the title slide?
Yes.
Okay. So I welcome everyone to the GPNW Mission Center Climate Justice webinar. And today we're going to be considering several different aspects of what a just transition is and what it means. But first, we're going to share with you why we feel that our faith tradition needs a resolution on fossil fuels. And then we'll explore aspects of just what a just transition might entail and share some hopeful examples and stories of how far along we are on a just transition. So recently, in response to some feedback and some very direct questions, we find the need to share why our faith community needs to take up the cross of stopping fossil fuel use, both the why and the why now. Why does Community of Christ need a resolution on fossil fuels? So in 2015, nearly all the nation states on the planet signed a legally binding treaty called the Paris Agreement. And they agreed that human activities were, in fact, heating up our planet, that global warming was a real thing, and they agreed that the overheating of the planet threatens life on Earth, at least life as we know it. The signers of that historic document also agreed that it was imperative that global temperature rise be held at well below 2 degrees Celsius to avoid catastrophic effects. And many of the participants expressed concerns that evidence showed that even 1.5 degree temperature rise would pose some extreme risks. And the plan was to reduce planet warming emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, by roughly 50% by 2030 and achieve net zero by 2050. And that was to prevent the worst of the scenarios being predicted. And in the 10 years that we've had since that agreement, that we've had to work towards those goals, toward the goal of reducing planet heating emissions, our carbon emissions have increased. Our fossil fuel usage has increased. Our global temperature continues to rise. Now we've slowed the rate of increase of emissions, but we are still increasing, still heading for catastrophe. So we've raised the average temperature almost 1.5 degrees Celsius so far. And we're on a path on our current trajectory to raise our planet's temperature to about 3 degrees Celsius, about 5.5 degrees Fahrenheit or a little higher. And we're going to do that by the time that my second grade grandson is my age. Now, the red line is based on our current trend. The green line is if we can manage to balance our energy needs between fossil fuels and renewables. And the blue line, well, we might achieve that if we can stop the growth of our emissions and begin decreasing greenhouse gas by reducing power from burning stuff to transition to renewable energy rapidly. Last year was the hottest year ever recorded, hotter than the previous hottest year of the year before. In the past decade, the 10 years since the Paris Climate Accords, the hottest decade ever recorded. The single biggest cause of the overheating of the planet are the greenhouse gas emissions due to the burning of fossil fuels, mostly to generate electricity, heating, and transportation. The single most important task, by an order of magnitude for humanity, is to figure out how to not stop global warming, it's too late for that, but to arrest it short of the point where it cuts civilization off at the knees. What W. Wallace in section 150 termed, while there is yet day. And this is a time-limited task. The United Nations IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, tells us that if we haven't cut emissions in half by 2030, that's only 5 years, that we are most likely going to heat up our planet and trigger the unimaginable. Admittedly, there are countless issues that need to be dealt with. We get pulled in all different directions. Deforestation, soil degradation, air and water pollution. There's ocean health and biodiversity loss, how we're going to do our food production, plastic pollution, industrial animal production, the forever chemical pollution, and our ecosystems, as well as eco-racism and climate justice. All vital issues of concern, and as a faith community, we're called to address and to work on all of them. However, there is no other singular act that will have as great an impact on saving lives, slowing the loss of nature, alleviating suffering, enhancing equality, and promoting economic justice as the vital work to eliminate the use of fossil fuels. And I want to share a quote, one that spoke to me when I was just beginning to consider climate action as an act of faith. An environmental lawyer, Gus Speth, claimed, "I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address those problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need a spiritual and a cultural transformation. And we, meaning lawyers and scientists, don't know how to do that." Another more recent quote by an author, Mary Evelyn Tucker. She said, "For it may be the case that, as with the abolitionist movement in the 19th century and the civil rights movement in the 20th century, we will not respond at the scale and speed required until we see climate disruption as a moral issue and a spiritual challenge." So let's ask ourselves, who is best suited to trigger a spiritual and cultural transformation? Who best to address a moral and spiritual challenge? That is why this resolution asks us, as a faith movement, to call for, first, immediate stop to the growth of fossil fuel investment, exploration, extraction, and consumption. And please don't misunderstand. This is not a request to immediately stop using fossil fuels. That simply is not practical. We are saying stop the growth. This resolution doesn't ask us to turn off the spigot. The first ask is to stop adding more spigots. Next, we need an accelerated, just transition to renewable energy. We need to invest in green technologies, invest in the research to develop green technology. And we need to undertake that job with the goal of benefiting the most people possible. We cannot make this transition using the historically destructive and discriminatory methods and ideology. We can't follow the fossil fuel model of benefiting a few at the expense of the many. We have to reverse that ideology. Then stop supporting and patronizing organizations and businesses and companies that are actively promoting the increased use of fossil fuels. In this country, Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and Citibank are the four banks spending the most money to increase fossil fuel use. Ask them to stop investing your money to destroy the planet that you live on. And if they don't, stop investing your money with them. Take a look. What's in your wallet? And finally, we need to join with others to declare support for an international fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. Stopping fossil fuels must be a global initiative. No one country can do it, and we should all contact our elected officials all over the world and express our desire that they support an international treaty to stop expanding fossil fuel usage. The immediate, rapid, and intentional reduction of fossil fuel use is the most important step that must be taken now. None of the other environmental issues can be corrected or avoided until we kick our self-destructive addiction to fossil fuels. And we've known that human activity was heating up the planet. We've known that for well over 70 years. The oil company scientists were predicting the burning of fossil fuels would result in global warming back in the 50s. And kudos for how their predictions were shockingly accurate. So let's just take a breath here, and I want to show you my favorite Super Bowl commercial. I don't know if you guys saw this or not.
As a scientist, I know by the time she takes her first breath, 9 billion more tons of carbon pollution will be in the air. When she takes her first steps, wildfires will have burned millions more acres she could have explored. By the time a child born today goes to college, it may be too late to leave them the world we promised. Our window to act on climate change is like watching them grow up. We blink and we miss it.
What many of us were less sure about was exactly how global warming would manifest itself in our lives. We knew the planet was heating up, but what would that do? And after the past couple of years for us, probably since 2022, 2023, the vague warnings of far-off climate disasters that we've heard about for decades now became a here and now thing. Industrialized countries finally have front row seats to witness the effects of global temperature rise in a dramatic increase in extreme weather events. Now, these are seats that developing countries have been sitting in for far longer. But we are enduring more hurricanes, more droughts, more rain events, more floods, more deadly heat waves, more polar vortex disruptions. And they are intensifying and becoming more destructive. Just this year, in January, we saw 100-mile-an-hour winds in Los Angeles drive wildfires out of the forests and into subdivisions. What, a week and a half ago, Kentucky got a month's worth of rain in one day, causing massive flooding. And we've had snowstorms along the Gulf of Mexico. There, I said it. Last year, here in the United States, we recorded 27 extreme weather events, 28 the year before. The most events during the two hottest years on record. And you can see the number is steadily climbing the past several decades. Last May, portions of Brazil received 6 months worth of rain in a single week, triggering flooding, mudslides, and the collapse of a hydroelectric dam. And then, meanwhile, in the other half of Brazil, they were enduring the worst drought since record keeping began, triggering massive wildfires in the Pantanal. And that's the world's largest tropical wetlands. Europe has suffered unprecedented summer heat waves for the past 3 years in a row. And historically, they're known for having a temperate climate. Most homes have not required air conditioning, leaving the residents unprepared for the duration and the intensity of these heat waves. The United Nations estimates that heat waves in Europe in 2022 claimed 60,000 lives. And in 2023, another 47,000 died from the heat. And the effects of last year's heat wave is still being compiled. Just FYI, for those of us in the United States, 45 degrees Celsius is around 113 Fahrenheit. And that is alongside unprecedented rain and flooding as well. Valencia, Spain, received a year's worth of rain in 8 hours, triggering flash flooding, killing hundreds, many of them still sitting in their living rooms. Extreme weather events are increasing all over the world. Last year, the planet Earth experienced 58 extreme weather events worldwide, beaten only by the 70 events the year before. And in wealthy countries, we can talk about recovery from these events. Between the hurricanes Milton and Helene in the US last year and the Los Angeles fires, estimated recovery costs could climb into the $500 billion range. $500 billion. That's more than the average or the annual spending of 3/4 of the governments in the world, maybe more. To put that in perspective, $500 billion is roughly the annual governmental budget for all of Canada. Well over half the countries in the world simply cannot recover from weather events of that magnitude, dooming them to a poverty cycle that they simply cannot break free from. The increase in hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, and fires are impacting insurance companies as well. Losses from claims resulting from the dramatic increase in extreme weather events are impacting insurance companies' ability to cover claims and continue to offer coverage. Average homeowner rates jumped 25% in the past couple of years, and in some higher event risk areas are seeing jumps of 40 to 50%. And it's kind of ironic that the very insurance companies that are moaning about climate losses are also the same companies that invest heavily in fossil fuels. Thus, they're causing the very climate disasters that they now claim they cannot insure against. We are told to love our neighbors. In the process of burning fossil fuels for energy, instead of loving our neighbors, we are sickening our neighbors. We are killing them in heat waves. We are drowning them in floods, and we're making it impossible for them to grow the food they need to eat. And if those people are unwilling to simply die in place, they will begin to migrate towards someplace they can survive. On our current business as usual trajectory, we will blow past 1.5 degree temperature rise in another year or two, and will exceed the 2-degree temperature rise before my second grade grandson graduates from high school. As we approach 3 degrees Celsius, the United Nations, science groups, economic forums, even insurance companies predict that global warming will be sufficiently disruptive to produce between 1 and 3 billion climate refugees. One million refugees on the southern US border were enough to completely discombobulate our politics, bring out the ugliest possible side of our national character, and elect a slate of abnormally anti-immigrant, profit over people, climate deniers in history. Multiply those million refugees 1,000-fold around the world, and just try to imagine what sacred creation, what the worth of persons, conflict and peace, human rights, economic development, social justice, any of the other things that we care about, what will it look like on a world that disrupted? At the current level of global warming right now, we are seeing millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people already displaced due to climate instability. And it's hard to pin that down because right now, we don't have an official legal category for people who are forced to move because they can't survive due to the climate where they live anymore. So I'm going to repeat, there is no other singular act that will have as great an impact on saving lives, slowing the loss of nature, alleviating suffering, enhancing equality, and promoting economic justice as the work to stop the use of fossil fuels. Now, some nations grew rich and powerful by exploiting and monopolizing fossil fuels. It has allowed for rapid technological development, and it's elevated overconsumption into an art form. But at what cost? Our addiction to fossil fuels have led us down an unsustainable path. We see a sinful imbalance of resources, of wealth and influence. It has created an astronomical wealth gap, not only among nations, but also within populations of those nations. And it's taught many people to never stop exploiting, never stop subjugating, and never stop extracting from the planet, from resources, from people. Fossil fuels have poisoned the air, the water, and the land. Air pollution from burning fossil fuels is the single largest cause of premature preventable death, with estimates ranging anywhere from 5 to 10 million people per year. The junk that's released from burning fossil fuels contributes to heart disease, stroke, diabetes, lung cancer, COPD, blood pressure, hypertension, as well as having links to increased risk of developing brain diseases like dementia, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's. Extraction and distribution of fossil fuels poisons the land and the waterways, creating vast sacrifice zones where the inhabitants who live there are subjected to toxic levels of air, water, and land contamination. Those are the people that we are willing to let suffer to keep our lights on. They're an involuntary sacrifice for the benefit of us. There's a hymn, truly, these are the leftover people and leftover places. Fossil fuels developed a model of benefiting a few at the expense of the many. And as followers of Christ, we must advocate for a model that benefits the many and does not exploit people or the planet. So eliminating fossil fuels is not only a means of preventing a catastrophe. So let's catch our breath again for just a moment, and let's watch another short video. This one is from Greenpeace.
So, what now? This year, we want life to be different. We want an end to the health, climate, and nature emergencies. Instead of going back to how things were, now is our chance to build a better future for everyone. A future where we end investment in fossil fuels and prioritise clean energy and transport. Where clean air and a stable climate isn't a luxury. Where the products we buy aren't covered in single-use plastic. Where forests aren't torched for industrial meat. Where destructive fishing is banned so oceans can thrive. Together, we can pressure companies and governments to make the right decisions and act on them. It's time to rebuild a greener, more just and peaceful world for all of us. Because together we can.
Everyone take 2 deep breaths. So again, eliminating fossil fuels is not only a means of preventing catastrophe. It is also an amazing opportunity for us to offer an alternative vision to the world. In an amazing water into wine miracle, scientists and engineers over the past few decades have reduced the cost of energy from the sun and wind by 90%. Today, right now, as of this moment, the cheapest way to produce power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. This is an almost unbelievable gift. It allows us to imagine, to implement rapid progress toward breaking free of fossil fuels. And no, it's not perfect. It's not a free lunch. No such thing. We're going to have to mine lithium and do other things that are disruptive. However, these disruptions are minuscule. They're tiny compared to the disruptions of the emergency that we've already created by burning fossil fuel. And the upside is just enormous. An upside of better public health by not having to pour tons of pollution into the atmosphere by burning things for energy. We would lower respiratory and cardiac issues. We would help protect vulnerable groups like the elderly and children. An upside of helping cut short, to some degree, the rise in temperature that's upending our planet. This helps protect the biodiversity of our planet, protects natural resources on multiple fronts. Renewable energy can liberate communities and nations from the monopoly, the stranglehold of fossil fuel companies. So long as we depend on a commodity, coal, gas, and oil, that's only available in a few places, the people who control them end up with far too much power, which is far too easy to abuse. An upside of energy creation is that it's more spread out, it's more localized, it's resulting in better resilience, empowering local communities to generate and control their own renewable energy, fostering energy independence and economic development, creating healthier energy jobs. An upside of increased energy access to underserved communities and countries that lack traditional energy sources. And by reducing dependence on foreign sources, oil sources, it protects against price volatility and it enhances energy security. An upside that allows energy generation without creating dead zones, air, water, and land contamination, land desecration. It allows people to live healthy lives in zones that are generating energy. And without sacrifice zones and without sacrifice workers. There is no other single act that will have as great an impact on saving lives and slowing the loss of nature, alleviating suffering, enhancing equality, and promoting economic justice as the work of eliminating the use of fossil fuels. Community of Christ declared a climate emergency at our last World Conference. Not a climate watch, not a climate warning. We declared a climate emergency. Emergency, that implies the need for immediate action, not putting it off until the next conference. We're on a timer. We need to add our voices as a faith tradition, as a mission center, as a congregation, and as individuals. Because we're on the verge of creating human suffering of biblical proportions. Mothers and fathers desperately searching for a place to live where there is a future of hope for their children. If we truly believe that our welfare resides in their welfare, we cannot ignore the emergency that's facing us right now. We must take action to stop the growth of fossil fuels. Not stop. The first thing we do is stop the growth. Then we must take action to demand an accelerated just transition to renewable energy and reduce fossil fuels. We must take action to demand organizations stop promoting the increased use of fossil fuels. And we must request all of our respective governments all over the world to support a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. We cannot wait. We cannot put it off until the next conference. We need to act as if there is a climate emergency. We need to move at the speed of our faith. Thank you.
So thank you, Paul. Our team has been contemplating the challenges of climate for more than 3.5 years. What Paul has done for us today is really to synthesize or to summarize and really to integrate more than 3.5 years of webinars into a single presentation. When we began as a team, little did we know how our work would evolve. But as the pace of the climate emergency has accelerated, we've tried to adjust our presentations and our focus. And one result of that was supporting the Greater Pacific Northwest Mission Center in putting forth this G5 resolution, building on the 2023 resolution passed at the World Conference declaring a climate emergency. So now we're going to spend perhaps 10 minutes, we have a little bit of tight time, with some discussion, and I want to pose these questions to you. What if World Conference doesn't pass the G5 resolution? Can the world still progress toward reducing fossil fuel consumption? If G5 passes, will we all be okay then? Is everything going to be fine? What impact will that resolution have on our transitioning from fossil fuels? And finally, what is our calling as a faith movement if the world doesn't beat its fossil fuel addiction? So I welcome you to contemplate those questions, and we'll be watching for hands raised to chime in on this discussion. And I'm going to ask for the help of my team members to um, identify people who would like to speak. And if you raise your hand, virtually in the react button, it'll move your square to the front of the line, so to speak, on the screen, because we have multiple screens of participants today. What are your thoughts? What's your reaction to what you've heard today and those questions that we've posed? Michael?
Yeah, I put in the chat, in 2020, the United Nations put out a report that stating that the faith-based organisations are the groups working the most to do something about sustainable development goals. So by interfaith networking, we can all use them as allies to help promote moral, spiritual and cultural change with climate change.
So you see our resolution is consistent with that, is what you're making the point about?
Yeah. The Sustainable Development Goals
Sure.
cover a widespread range of things, but what I'm saying is, because the UN noted that the faith-based communities are the leaders in promoting these, that they would also, in my thinking, become the leaders in promoting cultural change, moral, spiritual and cultural change with climate change, if you
Sure.
approach
Thank
them
you.
and work with them.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Perhaps people are feeling a little stunned and left you speechless. I don't know, but
Lila has her hand up.
Lila, go ahead. You can unmute yourself. Thank you.
I did. My father spent an entire life working for Standard Oil, which used to be Standard Oil, then became American Oil, and ended up being BP. And that was his livelihood. He was a boiler maker at a plant, a refinery in Sugar Creek, which is right outside of Independence. And over the years, he accumulated stock from BP. He died in 2009, and all of that stock moved to me because I'm an only child. And I've had that stock ever since. And when Stacy Cram spoke to us when she was here on our group and said we need to divest ourselves of fossil fuels, I said, yes, we do. And at the end of December, I sold all of those stocks that I inherited from my dad and reinvested them in something else. And I feel so much better now knowing that I'm not continuing to have that stock under my house.
Well, thank you. It's a great story. Others?
Wow.
Kathleen?
My concern with the resolution is that it doesn't challenge us to change our individual lifestyles. Like the Paris Accords, it's talk. And I guess that concerns me because very specific thing, like what we eat and what we wear has such a profound impact. It ripples all the way down. And all of these things are companies trying to satisfy consumption. And we really need to look at ourselves individually as consumers. I know years ago, I read the book, Diet for a Small Planet. I don't know how many of you might be familiar with that. In reading about the deforestation and the disregard of the indigenous peoples just to produce bananas for Americans, I stopped eating bananas. You know, it's a tiny, tiny little thing, but there are so many specific things we could do. You know, just going back to the word of wisdom, just to eat meat sparingly. If you look at how much oil and deforestation and everything else happens just to produce meat. So I'd like to see something of a resolution that challenges us to live according to those things which would have the ripple effect.
That's a terrific idea. And I think that the question is, how do we motivate all of us as a collective to take those individual actions? What are the things that we need to do? Others have thoughts?
I think one of the things that is happening because we have proposed the resolution is that people are talking about stopping fossil fuels. And I don't know whether the resolution will pass or not, but my goal is to embed the principles that that resolution stands for in the minds and the hearts and the lives of people. And that means, yes, taking individual action in our own lives to stop using as much energy, to stop buying, to stop consuming, to stop being a contributor to the consumption society that we belong to that is based on fossil fuels. But it goes beyond that. It also, the principle is also there for us to confront corporations with letters, petitions, in some, for those that can, marches and protests, to change their ways on a systemic and corporate basis as we are changing it on an individual basis. So my hope is that the resolution will cause enough discussion and enough concern that we can all become a Lila that takes action to change what has been in place for so long and make a difference, just as Lila did in changing her investments.
Joan?
My mind was really struck when Paul talked about his reference to Section 150 back in 1974 and the call to action, to be in the forefront of action while there's yet day. And somehow I put that together with the fact that the climate team's overall theme for this year is talking about prophetic courage and the need for prophetic courage and action. And I just keep wondering, like, what if we don't do this? Lori has a book that she keeps referring to, which is great. What if we get it right? But I think one of your questions, Dean, was what if we don't get this right? And I just think that the call is so urgent and so prophetic.
Lila, go ahead. You're muted still.
I think everybody should read that book. My husband and I have read it. Well, I'm legally blind, so he has to read to me. But we have read that book just in recent weeks, and it's I think, and we in our Christmas letter we sent it to everybody that we communicate with at Christmas time. You should read this book, and I hope a lot of people will, because it certainly needs to be read by all of us.
Amen.
What if we get it right? That's the
Yes,
book.
what if we get it right?
Alice?
Yeah. If it doesn't pass, we still as individuals can get a hold of our legislators, eat organic food and grass-fed beef, and there are some companies that are selling products that it's restorative farming, and support things like that and get the word out. I still think we have a responsibility whether the church passes that or not.
Excellent point. Tammy?
There. So I guess that I feel like I'm doing what I can on it, or at this point, I can always do more, but I feel like I'm really trying to make an effort on a personal basis to be able to reduce my reliance on fossil fuels. But I still struggle where I am in the Midwest, in the heart of, I guess I'm kind of Northeast, but where I am in the Midwest of Kansas, I'm surrounded by people, many people who don't even believe that there is a climate emergency. And so even trying to have that discussion sometimes is very difficult. And I struggle. I almost need like a transcript, of something to be able to say to try to navigate that discussion. And so I totally agree that, on an individual basis, there's things that we need to be able to do. And yet one of the questions was then the presentation was what gives you hope? And one of the things that gives me hope is that the church is saying, let's at least make a statement and maybe then we can join hands with others of interfaith or even other secular organizations, all of these groups that have a common goal, that at least if we've made a statement, it's a place to start as a larger body. So yes, there's the individual responsibility, but it gives me hope to know that even while I'm surrounded in a difficult place of being able to take that individual action, at least my church is trying to be able to join hands with others that are trying to be able to know how to stop our reliance on fossil fuels. So
Point well
thanks.
made, Tammy. I should mention we have advocated folks looking at Catherine Hayhoe's website, who does a good job of suggesting ways that people can engage in conversation with those who, if not deniers, are at least skeptics. And so you might look at Catherine Hayhoe's webpage. Paul,
Okay.
we're going to move on here, but Paul, you had your hand up. You want to make a final comment?
Yeah, there are so many facets. What we eat, we can't continue to consume
What do you say your name
beef
is?
the way we are. So that has to be addressed. There's going to be a reckoning coming. We can't continue to pollute our water the way we are with chemicals and whatnot. But in the long run, even if we stop eating meat immediately, we still have to address fossil fuels. Suddenly stopping beef production is not going to save us. It's not going to stop the warming. We have to do that first. It's overriding. It's the greatest thing we have to do first. Not that other things aren't important, because those things are also going to come to a head. But I think that's kind of the point, is that there's, our degradation of our soil. There's just so many different things. But even if we don't pass that, how do we get 200,000, 250,000 church members to pick up the phone and go, hey, Mr. Elected Representative, I'm your constituent, and I do not want you to stop research on renewable energy. I do not want you to stop issuing licenses for offshore wind turbines, because it would make a huge difference. 10,000 would make a huge difference. But we're all over the world. If every one of us, if we could marshal our whole community, we would move the needle. We're not going to fix this by changing one LED light bulb, but as a community, we can make a difference.
So I want to call attention. Mark Minton in the chat has asked a lot of why questions. Why aren't we doing this or that at the World Church level? Why are we still flying around the world in jets as a part of our activity and so on? I just would encourage you to take a look at the questions he's raised as a way of thinking further about how we change our lifestyle in so many different ways. And Lori, you wanted to make a comment? You
Just very briefly, we can't do those other things without eliminating fossil fuels eventually anyhow. Eating better is going to be a byproduct of treating our soils better, which is going to be a byproduct of our efforts, not just to eliminate fossil fuels, but to transition. We're not going to be without energy and power, but we are going to do things. We're going to create a culture and a climate that's different than the one we live in right now. That's the task. It's not it's focusing our attention on the underlying issue that will by definition, because of how it's all connected, also have positive effects on these other areas of concern.
This is rich conversation, and I wish we could keep going, but we have more material to present to you. So now we're going to move to a section discussing what does a sustainable energy transition look like.
Thanks, Dean. Real quick, Tammy, come back next month, because one of the things we're going to be talking about is how sick the burning of fossil fuels is making the population from air pollution. And if people don't believe in climate change, they can still believe in how sick people are getting from air pollution. So, on to the next topic. When we think about stopping the growth of fossil fuel usage, it can feel overwhelming, especially for those of us in North America during the current political climate. What does moving toward a sustainable energy future even look like? Do we all have to go back to horse and buggy days, shiver in cold homes? And if we divest from fossil fuel investment, will we fall behind financially? Well, the answer to both those questions is no. We need to move forward into an even better sustainable future, powered by so many great advancements already taking place. While national and state-driven programs have recently taken some hits here at home, the good news is that many countries, regions, cities, and corporations are progressing rapidly towards our green energy future. They brainstorm, they experiment, innovate, and learn from each other. So here are a few examples of what's been happening and what progress is being made, taken from a couple of 2023 German documentaries available for you to view on YouTube. Here in North America, we're often unaware of the progress happening in the rest of the world. But before we get to all the cool international advances, let's start with a success story in the USA.
More than 50% of the world's population live in urban areas. By 2050, it could be nearly 70%. Big cities have big needs when it comes to water, food, and energy. This heavy demand on resources poses daunting challenges to researchers in a world grappling with climate change. Those cities and towns will need large amounts of energy. Revolutionizing the complex systems of our energy supply is one of the biggest challenges for a global transition to green energy, and for people, probably the most tangible.
So for us as cities and responsible for the policy in the cities, I think it's so important that we take a leading role, because it is possible for cities to change.
So we are very conscious that we need to move into an economy that is renewable and circular and nature positive, all those at the same time.
Actually, we don't have a choice. I think that we have little time left to save the planet. So we have to do whatever we can as fast as possible.
To see how a sustainable energy supply can work in practice, we head to the United States. There, a California city is aiming to become the first carbon-neutral community in the country. Lancaster is home to about 175,000 residents. In 2009, officials started on a journey to go green, fundamentally transforming the city's economy and infrastructure. Not only was it a technological overhaul, it was a shift in mentality.
It's the purpose of government to assist people, not to delay people. It used to take minimum of 6 months if this person wanted to put solar panels on their roof. They'd have to get a permit. Somebody would always have a design change, but it would take 6 months just for them to be allowed to do it. And so when I found that out, I sent out a memo. It now takes 45 minutes. And it better be 45 minutes. In the city of Lancaster, the hardest part was changing the culture within the city staff, that we look for reasons to say yes. We don't look for reasons to say no.
You know, when we started out down this path, we were laughed at, we were scorned, we were, Facebooking up every day. But we set out to develop a model for a city that once the world woke up, it would be easier for them to do it. As we went down this path, we made more money than you can possibly imagine. Alternative energy is profitable, and it's profitable in a huge way.
Lancaster's mayor, Rex Paris, began by having photovoltaic panels installed on all municipal buildings. The generated electricity was used for public lighting. In the process, Paris discovered it saved the city a lot of money. The savings were put towards installing even more photovoltaic panels on the roofs of private residences. These systems also became mandatory for new buildings. Bit by bit, Lancaster created an alternative energy network. Excess electricity started being used to generate hydrogen to fuel public transportation. The low-cost electricity and cheap hydrogen attracted new, large companies, and Lancaster solidified its reputation as a green boomtown in the United States.
I traveled a lot. I went to the World Economic Forum in Tianjin. I went to Saudi Arabia. I went to the Middle East. Every energy conference, and I learned a lot.
Thanks to the sunny weather and the already existing solar and wind parks in the area, green energy and hydrogen production continued to expand. When Lancaster began the process of transforming its own energy system in 2009, the unemployment rate was at 17%. In 2023, it dropped to around 6%. Lancaster became a self-sufficient green energy powerhouse, and highly profitable too.
Once people start being innovative and creative, it doesn't stop with the immediate goal in front of you. It extends everywhere. This really is the most exciting city in the world, I think, for that reason.
We have a common purpose, and it's a simple purpose. It's that our children survive. That's not hard, And when you have that as a common purpose, you can put aside all the differences, and you can make things happen. You can build things that have never been built before. This project here is actually quite remarkable.
So from the USA in Lancaster, next, let's look at Norway, an oil-producing and exporting country, which is one of the pioneers in green innovation and change. Their goal is to reduce energy emissions to near zero by 2030, and they're well on their way. And incidentally, along the way, their economy is becoming less dependent on oil revenues. It's not about a single solar farm outside each city, but a comprehensive plan with multiple parts working together and using microgrids. For instance, like we just saw in Lancaster, all schools in Oslo are being built with solar panels. They produce more energy than the schools need, so the extra is shared with nearby buildings in a microgrid. Marianne Borgen, Oslo's then mayor, embraced the philosophy that it's not about restrictions, it's about opportunities. I want to repeat that because it's so important. It's not about restrictions, it's about opportunities. They're working with the construction sector to implement carbon neutral advances in heating and building materials, again with energy sharing in microgrids, with the result that now more and more of the construction sites are zero emission because the technology is in place. Let's take a look at an example in Trondheim on the northern coast of Norway. At 63 degrees north latitude, that's almost as far north as Fairbanks, Alaska.
Upcycled to something else. We've been working systematically on finding out how we can make buildings part of the solution. I mean, buildings accounts for around 40% of carbon emissions globally, 40% of energy use, so a huge part of the problem, meaning that we also have the opportunity to be a huge part of the solution.
In 2019, an office building commissioned by Sonja Hoon's company was inaugurated in the Norwegian city of Trondheim. It was named Powerhouse. The roof is covered with solar panels angled optimally to capture the sun's rays in Northern Europe. As a result, the Powerhouse, with its 3,000 square meters of panels, produces an annual average of 500,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. That's more than double the amount it consumes itself. The surplus electricity is used on a local microgrid to supply neighboring buildings and electric buses and cars.
So yes, solar energy works in the Arctic North. Moreover, the jobs transition along with the technology changes. Norway's former Minister of Climate and Environment said that they found that employers and employees are now largely very much on board, that cutting emissions is not only the right thing to do for the world's climate and the future of our kids, but it's also smart for the economy. Northern European countries bordering the North Sea are working towards a linked green energy grid. Launched in 2020, the North Sea Power Grid will, when completed in 2040, be the world's largest network to reliably generate green energy. It began in 2021 when England and Norway launched an underwater power sharing cable between Kvindal and Blythe. England is already a European leader in offshore wind farms and a green energy exporter. The Blythe offshore wind farm alone powers 36,000 homes. Water in some places in mountainous Norway drops hundreds of meters to power hydroelectric turbines. The gigawatts of electricity generated are stored, converted for onward transmission, and then carried between Kvindal and Blythe. Structures are in place to convert and send the energy back and forth as needed, greatly increasing energy security. Blythe had once been a coal mining town with high unemployment after those mines closed. The power link has already turned Blythe into a major offshore energy hub, attracting further investments and more jobs. This grid is designed to share energy back and forth on demand. Plans include the construction of multiple large energy hubs, which are artificial islands that can be expanded over time. The first one has been built 80 kilometers off the coast of Jutland in Denmark, with cables to both Denmark and Belgium. Originally operating at a 3 gigawatt capacity, it will be expanded to 10 gigawatts by 2040. When completed, this shared North Sea energy grid is expected to have roughly the capacity of 40 nuclear power plants. And the total potential of North Sea offshore wind farms is about the equivalent of 200 nuclear plants. Now, along with energy generating capacity, there needs to be a green energy storage one. Companies like Siemens in Germany are working on developing large-scale production of hydrogen. Basically, it's produced by using an electric current to split water into hydrogen and oxygen and use it for such storage. However, in addition to energy storage, the hydrogen can be combined with carbon dioxide taken directly from the atmosphere to create hydrogen fuels or e-fuels, cleaner substitute for any of the existing fossil fuels being used today, also less expensive. Along with extensive research and development, one interesting partnership is a collaboration between a research team in Berlin and the University of Cape Town in South Africa to create a clean hydrogen fuel that can replace the propane and firewood used for cooking and heating in so many poor populations without access to electricity. Incidentally, this will also free up considerable time currently spent in firewood gathering. In this learning hub building at the prestigious Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, researchers are working on technologies to extract and reuse the lithium, cobalt, manganese, and nickel in existing batteries. This process involves shredding those batteries, separating out the black mass where the elements are, and then using, are you ready? Orange peels, or, and sometimes bacterial cultures, to extract the individual elements. While not yet anywhere near a commercial use, they are able to extract 99% of the minerals from the batteries, with 30 patents so far. At the California Institute of Technology, in collaboration with many international institutions, researchers are working on a way to make hydrogen fuels directly from sunlight using an artificial photosynthesis process. Basically, artificial leaves made of semiconductors. And in Germany, they're working on a process that requires no external energy or electricity, just photovoltaics and water. If this process can be scaled up and commercialized, hydrogen will become cheaper than any other fuel, almost free. China is one of the countries capitalizing on the fact that renewable energy is now a lower cost solution than fossil fuel, and they're in a rapid upswing. Industrial wastelands and areas no longer being farmed are being turned into gigantic solar farms. In 2023, China had grown its green energy share to 35%. While that means that 65% was still dependent on fossil fuels, predominantly coal, China is working to double its solar and wind power by 2030. This is placing it alongside the European Union as global leaders in the sustainable energy transition. They now have in place the world's largest floating solar farm, and they're creative in using even inhospitable terrain for solar farms. As this energy transition continues to take place, China's economy will benefit directly from lower cost electricity, while also enjoying the benefits of reduced air pollution. So this has been a whirlwind peek at just a few of the many, many projects happening all around the world. There's a massive and accelerating energy transition already underway, with lots of good investment opportunities. And there are so many people working to make sure that it's a just transition. That's an important justice issue, but it also makes good business sense. So I want to end with a quote from Jagar Singh, who ran the US Department of Energy loan programs during the Biden administration. In the book, What If We Get It Right? He is quoted as saying that we need to take care not to replace our current one energy addiction, fossil fuel, with another single source. Each technology has strengths and weaknesses. We need to move toward a diversified mix of the renewable energy alternatives, those that we've touched on today, and also nuclear and thermal. And so now we'll turn it over to Andrew and Susan for more about what a just transition includes and what it looks like.
Joan, there's a lot in there to be positive about. Well, Paul Bethel has clearly set us the agenda. We must stop using fossil fuels. Lancaster in California and others have proved that it's not only possible, it's socially and economically advantageous to shift to renewable energy. It boosted the economy, created more jobs, and benefited everybody in every economic level. Now we need to talk about how we shift. We know that a transition is happening, but we want to make it a just transition, one that leaves no one behind. We'll be coming back to talk about just transitions in future webinars, but today we hope to give you just some of the basic points. We're going to watch a really short video just now. It moves very fast. So afterwards, we'll be presenting the points once again and making a few comments about them. Let's run the video.
We're in the midst of a decade where we will decide our future. We need a massive shift towards renewable energy and electrification to stave off the worst impacts of climate change. Fortunately, people are already coming together to implement these solutions. The shift is well underway and accelerating. To truly be successful, this must also be a just energy transition. Labor unions and environmental justice groups were the first to call for a just renewable energy transition years ago. Now we can all take part in a just transition by following the leadership rooted in Black, Indigenous, communities of color, and low-income communities most impacted by the fossil fuel industry. We can't build this massive change while utilizing historically destructive practices. We can work so that no one is left behind. A just transition means everyone has access to affordable, clean electricity, heating, and transportation. Communities democratically decide how this clean energy transition plays out for them. Policies are crafted that ensure the benefits of the clean energy economy are equitably distributed. New financing options are developed that address and remedy the harmful practices of the past and allow everyone to access clean energy. Workers displaced by the transition are supported and prepared for a just transition. Impacts on people and environment are considered at every step, and diverse ecosystems are protected. These solutions can also better prepare us to respond to climate-related extreme weather events like hurricanes, heat, flooding, or fires. Now, for those of us whose work is focused on the clean energy economy, a just transition must be central to what we do, and not a footnote as we power towards a decarbonized society.
Okay, so let's talk about those 6 points again. The first one, everyone has access to clean, affordable energy and transport, etc. Communities, number 2, communities demographically decide how this just transition plays out for them locally. Number 3, policies are put in place to ensure that benefits of clean, renewable energy are equitably distributed. Number 4, new financial options are implemented to remedy the harmful practices of the past and make current solutions affordable. And number 5, workers displaced by transition are supported and prepared for new jobs. And finally, number 6, impacts on people and the environment are considered at every step and diverse ecosystems are protected. We'll consider each of these points separately and provide a brief story to illustrate them. So the first one, equal access to resources and solutions. That's everyone has access to clean, affordable energy and transportation. Those least responsible often experience the worst effects. Those are low-income groups and people of colour. Burdens and benefits of climate action must be distributed equitably. No more concrete wastelands in our cities or green areas. Renewable energy available for the wealthy and for the disadvantaged. Transport options do not exclude the marginalised or the disadvantages. So my story comes from the International Renewable Energy Agency. We've heard stories about big corporations muscling in on vulnerable communities in developing countries, taking their resources, polluting their land and rivers, even without compensation. But this doesn't have to be the way. One of the big areas ready for transition to renewable energy in the form of solar and wind power is the sub-Saharan Africa. The International Renewable Energy Agency works with local communities, ensuring the benefits from wind and solar infrastructure with employment, training, land lease, and income from generated profits. An example of this is a 100 megawatt wind farm located in the Maasai community. It has been set up with local landowners. The project's multiple landowners receive rental per wind turbine on their land. The rental is calculated at 1.4% of the revenue generated by each turbine and is paid at agreed intervals. Susan.
Thank you, Andrew. Let's look at the second key point needed in a just transition. That is equal voice with inclusive decision-making power. In a just transition, communities democratically decide how energy changes and how solutions play out for them locally. Members of the focus communities participate in developing and implementing climate policies. As a result, the policies tend to be much more successful and the people much more resilient and comfortable with change. Briefly, it means that local residents help identify their own needs. They identify the problem as it impacts them locally, and then they problem solve. They identify the best solutions. They actively help implement the solutions locally. To borrow a phrase from the Black Lives Matter movement, there should be nothing about us without us. Let me give you an example of a community that transitioned to clean energy as a result of one man's passion and the grassroots support of the community. My father grew up in a small rural town in northwest Missouri called Rockport. Some of you may have heard of it. It boasted one gas station, a small funeral parlor, its own bank and post office, and it served the family farms of Atchison County. During the summers, my family would visit my grandparents on a little chicken farm outside of town. In the early 2000s, the funeral director of Rockport, Eric Chamberlain, noticed a wind turbine on an Iowa bluff while he was driving a hearse to the cemetery. He was intrigued. He lived on a windy bluff, so he investigated wind energy, and over the next few years, he shared his passion and enthusiasm for wind energy with the residents and leaders of Rockport. He initiated and developed locally with those leaders, and they partnered with a professional corporation to build 4 wind turbines. Construction equipment and the crew all came from Rockport, this little teeny tiny town. In 2008, Rockport became the first city in the US with the capacity to generate 100% of its electricity power from wind resources. Now, do they do that every day? No. Sometimes the wind dies down. But they have the capacity to do that, and the extra energy that they get from the wind turbines goes into a storage grid, and that grid gives them back energy when they don't need, when the wind dies down and they have to use it. Since then, Chamberlain has helped bring about a number of projects to the windy northwestern Missouri, and it generates $6 million annually in benefits for the Atchison County. It brings in $60,000 in savings for little tiny Rockport, and it creates dozens of jobs, economic stability, and growth. That's in my Rockport that I knew growing up. So let's look at point number 3. A just transition creates policies that provide equal benefits, equally distributed. It isn't enough to talk about and propose just solutions. They have to be written down and agreed upon as policies that hold, policies that can guide the implementation in a just way. So in a just transition, policies ensure that the benefits of clean renewable energy are equitably distributed. There's no more sacrifice zones. That's areas where industry has made living conditions unhealthy and unsustainable in order to increase corporate profits. There's no more preferential treatment of the wealthy, such as identifying rich neighborhoods as those most in need of environmental solutions, environmental tax breaks, and more economically advantageous energy sources. It's just policies that guarantee that energy resources go to the areas most in need, not with the most power. Spain is among the top 10 countries in the world that are leading the way toward renewable energy. They're implementing a plan to use wind and solar power, and their goal is to have 74% of their electricity renewable by 2030. These efforts not only contribute to Spain's energy independence, but also to economic growth through job creation in renewable energy fields. In Barcelona, Spain, the local residents have added their grassroots efforts to creating policies that mitigate the effects of excessive heat and drought, and create equitably distributed green zones, climate shelters, and even insect hotels. Planning included public feedback, meetings at the neighborhood and city level. Local residents designed the climate shelters, and prioritization was given to the participation of marginalized communities, marginalized populations who were paid for their work. This generated job training and skills development opportunities for those who faced difficulty otherwise finding paid work. And that was particularly women migrants, caregivers, people with functional diversity, or those who were over 45 years old. Also, they engaged local residents in the care of children and older persons during the construction of the space. These policies that Barcelona is implementing to help keep housing prices low and prevent green gentrification, because it's built into the policies. They are trying to green Barcelona in a socially just way, because too often improving the city green zones makes housing prices rise, and people have to move out because they can no longer afford the rent. The policies they've put in place from the grassroots up prioritize housing and land rights and ensure the ability of lower income and minority residents to remain in place. Let's look at the 4th point. The 4th key point is that a just transition makes financing available to all economic levels. Now, this goes along with policymaking, so there's adequate funds to implement the policies. New financing options are put in place to remedy the harmful practices of the past. Funds can be made available for both compensation and reparation. Local assistance is available to meet unique local needs. It's not generic. It's specific to the local needs. Grants, loans, and government subsidies must be easily available to all communities and easily accessed by even the most vulnerable populations who may not be familiar with how to write grants, how to apply for subsidies. In some cases, policies should provide advocates to help, that is, specialists on grants or committees and resource people who can explain the funding available and walk community members through the process of getting funding. A just transition means that government contracts are equitably distributed to local contractors, like what happened in Rockport and in Barcelona. Okay, Andrew, back to you.
Thank you, Susan. I'll do number 5. A just transition, ensuring job security. Workers displaced by transition are supported and prepared for new green jobs. This is future-proofing. When fossil fuel industries close or are scaled back, employees and contractors are supported. Workers help define their futures. Job training in renewable energy is available. Old job skills are applied to help transition away from fossil fuels, such as oil workers employed to cap and make safe old drilling rigs. Finance is located to bridge the gap and, if necessary, to support early retirement with some employees. You may remember from a previous webinar my story about my local coal-fired power station, Radcliffe-on-Soar. We could see the emissions from our home, from the cooling towers and the chimneys, and we probably breathed in its pollution. The power station was the UK's last coal-fired electrical generator that closed last year, which in itself is a reason to celebrate. It's a good example of what a just transition means to those employees that work there. In the last few years, up to the closing of the plant, the company, council officials, and unions representing the power station employees met to discuss how workers could be supported. Since then, employees have been offered support, training, and finance to transition to a new sustainable industries and green jobs. Let's take number 6, our last one. A just transition. Solutions protect environment and biodiversity. Impacts on people and environment are considered at every step, and diverse ecosystems are protected. Water, air, and land use upholds biodiversity as well as clean energy. We need to put right the damage caused by mining areas, polluted waterways, and waste zones. Impacts on wildlife is considered in every solution. The regeneration of previous fossil fuel industry sites is ensured. So my story comes from a place just down the road from here, where I live. There are working and old gravel pits. One of these gravel pits is called Tucklesholme. In 2018, quarrying operations ended at Tucklesholme, and the transformation from quarry to nature reserve began. The pits were allowed to fill with water, the edges managed to encourage wildlife, and over the next few years, we saw the reed bed in the Northern Lake expand to become the largest in the Trent Valley. The exposed sandy shingles on the Southern Lake provided valuable nesting habitat for rare birds such as the little ringed plover and oystercatcher, while the wet grassland areas offered protection and an ideal spot for lapwing to raise their young. The reserve was open to the public on the 17th of May 2019, and during lockdown in the pandemic, it was a place that I could go to walk and enjoy nature. This and other regenerated gravel pits are now managed by local wildlife trusts. So there you have it. Those are our 6 key points. Oh, and let's just go through what they were again. So number 1 was everyone has access to clean, affordable energy, transportation, etc. Like those Maasai farmers that get paid for electricity generated on their land. Communities decide how this just transition plays out for them locally. Remember Susan's stories about where their father grew up in Rockport and their wind turbines. Thirdly, policies are put in place to ensure the benefits of clean renewable energy are equally distributed. Remember Barcelona and their policy to socialise green issues, keeping the house prices affordable and for all those climate shelters. And 4, new financing options are implemented to remedy harmful practices of the past and make current solutions affordable. Number 5, workers displaced by transition are supported and prepared for new jobs, like my story of the last UK power station. Sorry, the last UK coal-fired power station, where all workers found jobs in sustainable industries. And number 6, the impacts on people and environment are considered at every step, and diverse ecosystems are protected, just like the transition from quarry to nature reserve. We know that transition has already started, and there will be a lot of changes to the way that we live our lives in the years to come. Renewable energy will provide us cheap, secure energy and will provide to the world without harmful pollution, and it will help slow climate change. Transition is coming. As a people of faith and a community of Christ, we want to make sure that it's a just transition that leaves no one behind. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, thanks for your participation today. First, a quick comment before we get on to March's session. At the end of the January session, I left you dangling with the issue of nuclear energy. Don't know whether you remember. Today, we didn't have time for details on transitional energy sources, but doing the detailed pros and cons, etc., will be a future webinar, so stay tuned. I will say one thing about nuclear. It is not a hypothetical. Microsoft has a deal to restart one of the reactors at 3 Mile Island. All the big tech companies that are doing artificial intelligence or cryptocurrency work, and that's going to be just about them all, because those are extremely energy intensive, are looking at nuclear energy as one option. So a complex topic to be covered soon. All right, next session, March 30th, titled Just Transition, Leave No One Behind. That last part is actually kind of like the definition of a just transition. It will include several topics, including a guest speaker, Natalie Reyes-Becerra, from the American Lung Association on the health problems related to the climate crisis, as mentioned earlier. So, hope you'll be able to join us next month. At this point, this finishes this particular series, so you can unmute and say your goodbyes. And again, thanks for coming. Great participation in the chats and online. Appreciate that. And we'll see you next month.